term into out was recommended as a good feeling of how to attack a golf ball. Percy Boomer, in his book, thought that it had to be a feeling. Ben Hogan didn't really specify how he thought you should interpret the request for into out. Now, the reason that the feeling is so important is what I developed in the second part of this series, which is that the shoulders are wider than they are deep, and that the arms, the left arm particularly, and the club emanate from the left shoulder. And so as you're swinging back, the whole mechanism is shifted this way. And if you leave it there, then it'll be pulling across the ball, which is wrong. And so the feel of into out actually rectifies that, so that when the shoulder gets back to the impact position, essentially a replica of your address position, that there are no vulnerabilities that are residual. Now, the remaining part of this has to do with another dimension. Traditionally, nowadays, people have their hands hanging straight below their shoulders. Now, that wasn't the truth 100 years ago. They generally liked the arms to be more like Bryson DeChambeau, the very excellent US Open champion, where the arms and club were in a straight line. Now, the reason that this is significant is because of geometry. If you've got a three-dimensional geometric shape formed by 4 points, the ball, each shoulder, and the hands, there is a gap between the hands and the line between my shoulder and the ball. Not to mention the fact that the distance between the fulcrum, my neck, and the club is specific but not ideal for the next thing that happens. When we attack a golf ball, we're at the very late stages straightening out the wrists, which means in this dimension, but we're also actually straightening them out in this direction, getting more away from having them hanging below the shoulder and more in a straight line. Now, if you look at champions, when they get through the ball to here, the arms and club are almost in a straight line, as if you're having a tug of war with somebody down here as you go through the ball. Now, as a consequence, that club would be underground if you've gone from this dimension to that one, which reaches farther away from you. And so, one, we can uncock the wrist very late, but also we have to pull up. And I talked about a trebuchet being an inverted trebuchet being a golf swing. And a trebuchet has this big rock that's dropping to fling the rock over the top. Well, the opposite is true. We're now using force assigned by the legs and body to pull the left shoulder not up vertically, but really away from the ball slightly as a way of applying force. So you see champions, they get to the ball at impact with their left shoulder substantially higher than it was at address. And that is how they make up for this geometric vulnerability where the distance from your neck to the ball has changed. And as a consequence, you risk hitting fat. The interesting thing is that if you start the way DeChambeau or Mo Norman from Canada started, with the arms and club in a straight line, then you don't have to pull this up. And you'll notice that DeChambeau's swing is much more round on the follow through because he doesn't have that vulnerability. As you saw in my display on the golf course today, lovely day to spend a little time on the range, you could see that I thought that there was pressure on the golf swing to have the club end up in a straight line with the arms. And that if we start with the hands lower, that change in dimension between the neck, essentially the pivot of the swing, and the club head is going to need to be addressed. It's going to be dealt with, and you can deal with it either by pulling the left side up so that there's now enough space for that longer instrument to fit between the neck and the ball, or actually the left shoulder and the ball. Or you can start in that shape and not have to pull up, but do as DeChambeau does and go around. Now, there's a couple of other contributing factors, particularly when golf shafts were made out of wood. They were very flexible, both linearly and also axially. And so the weight of the club head is one side of the shaft. It's only putters, which the USGA and the Royal and Ancient rather grudgingly allowed to have the shaft enter the middle of the head. All other clubs must have the shaft enter for an iron with the center of the axis of the shaft no more than 3/8 of an inch from the back edge of the club, and with the woods no more than 5/8. And so all of this mass as you're swinging, and the centrifugal force is acting, of course, on you, but also on the club. It wants not only to bend the club in this dimension as the club is being dragged around, but it also bends it in this direction. And so the toe of the club is actually being pulled down, the shaft is bending, and that's why when we ever checked the lie and loft of clubs, particularly the lie, we wouldn't have the club start perfectly flat on the ground, knowing that it needed to be slightly toe up so that this flex was accounted for in the sums. And so we used to slide a 2 shilling piece about the size of a 50-cent piece under the toe of the club, all the way, maybe a third of the way down the toe. If somebody was standing correctly and we could fit that in there, we knew that the club fit and took into account that flex in this direction. Now you saw me reach out and hook the club around my bag stand and pull backwards. This tug of war is significant too, because there's a pivot point, and I always say that it's the neck. That's where the shoulders cross the spine. But in fact, in terms of the mechanics going through the ball, as the arms and club are ending up in this straight line, say 2 or 3 feet into the follow through, it's all about mass. So if you've got an object that balances in the middle like a golf club, you've got a short distance from here to there, the angle of moment they used to call it, but a heavy weight, or a longer distance from here to here, from the fulcrum to here, and a lighter weight. Well, there's an equivalency with the body, because that center of your golf swing has enough mass above it to match the speed and length of the lesser mass down here going through the ball to balance it all out. And interestingly, Percy Boomer talked about the importance of hunting for the center of your golf swing. It was all very nebulous. They talked about the feel in the fingers, the feel of the golf swing, and hunting for the feeling of where the center of your golf swing is. I would suggest that it's a little bit down from the neck. It's probably the sternum, and it varies a little, and that's what he said, that it would be higher up with the longer clubs and lower down with the shorter ones. And they thought it important to go contemplating that. So that's why we have to pull up to make that space, and why Bryson DeChambeau just has to pull around. Wonderful.